Well, we would like to welcome you to another edition of Cooking with Culture's Vocabulary. I'm Orlando, and today we're going to talk about ingredients. Now, we all know that when you normally eat, you eat with a spoon, and the amount of stuff that's in there is a teaspoon. And sometimes when you eat, you have a bigger spoon. That would be like a tablespoon. And sometimes when we drink things, we have an actual cup. And so it could be that when we make measurements for ingredients, we can have a teaspoon or a tablespoon or a cup. But what happens if our amounts are different? Well, then we have what are called measuring spoons. So here we have measuring spoons or measuring cups. Those would be cups of different amounts. So let me show you what we mean a little bit about this. So first example, this right here, this red one, that is called a tablespoon. Let's say I want to make something that has a tablespoon amount in it. Well, I can take, for example, here's some yeast. I could pour some yeast into that, and that gives me about a tablespoon, you see? And I can, boom, add my tablespoon. Well, let's say instead of a tablespoon, I would like to have a teaspoon of something. That's this blue one here. Let me add some salt. For example, I might want to add a teaspoon of salt of something. And so here we go, filling it up, and that is my teaspoon. Pow! Inside there as well. I also have here this green one, which is half a teaspoon. So let's say, for example, I want to have some vanilla. Tanya, would I ever use vanilla for anything?
To give it flavoring.
Flavoring. So let's say I wanted to add a little bit of flavoring. This is a half a teaspoon of vanilla. Now notice I'm left-handed, so you can use both hands even. Boom! There it goes. Now it may be that instead of a half a teaspoon, I would like to use a 1/4 or a quarter, a fourth of a teaspoon. And so for example, here is some cream of tartar. What's cream of tartar for?
Makes the egg white stiff.
You put that in snickerdoodles, don't you?
Snickerdoodles,
Yeah.
or lemon meringue pie.
Bang! There it goes. We now have some cream of tartar. And so those are the measurements for the smaller things. A tablespoon, a teaspoon, and by the way, 3 teaspoons makes 1 tablespoon, a half a teaspoon, and a fourth of a teaspoon. Sometimes though, you don't even want that much. You might want to have what is called a pinch. And in that case, let's say for example, you have some salt right here, you would just take a pinch. That would be a pinch of salt. Or even less, let's say you want a dash. And so I could open this up and I could put in, this is my nutmeg. What do you use nutmeg for?
For flavoring.
A little more flavoring, bam, that's a dash. So those are for the smaller amounts. But let's say after you have a couple of tablespoons, you want a little bit bigger stuff. Well, then we go to, instead of the spoons, we go to the cups. And here, for example, we have a full cup. You often wonder what a real cup is. That's the size of an actual cup. So let's say, for example, that we want a cup of flour. We can easily go in here. We can get a cup of flour, kind of even it off a little bit. My wife, she kind of takes a little knife and goes, shoop, and then it's like even on top. And then she, boom. That would be adding a cup of flour. Besides a cup, it might be that we would like to have a half a cup. And so let's say, for example, that our recipe calls for a half a cup of sugar. We'd have to do, in that case, a half a cup of sugar. Bang! Enter it as well. Notice that we also have what is called a third of a cup. By the way, if they're made out of plastic, don't stick them on the oven because they start to melt on the end. But let's say, for example, that I want to add a third of a cup of milk. Notice, by the way, that the ingredients for liquids and solids is the same here. So if I'm doing a third of a cup of sugar, that's the same as a third of a cup of milk. Bang! Just added that one. I have no idea what we're making here with all these things we put together. Or another option might be just a fourth of a cup. And a fourth of a cup, for example, let's add a fourth of a cup of oatmeal here. And here we go. Bang! All that. Now, so now we see that that's the cup size. A cup, a half a cup, a third of a cup, or a fourth of a cup. One other little thing I've learned over the years, out in the backyard, if I got to cut some trees, that means I got to use my chainsaw, which means you've got to be able to use your chainsaw oil to mix it with the gasoline. You can take one of these little cups right here and you can do the very same thing.
Don't use my utensils for that.
Unless, of course, your wife catches you, and in that case, you never, ever, ever use these kitchen tools for things in the backyard. Well, with that, you've been exposed to measurements, how we measure things. Again, we start with a teaspoon, we move up to a tablespoon, we move up to a cup, and each one of those has a fraction of those. I think we got our vocab. It's time for you now to cook up some cultures and make your own little recipe with all of these different combinations. Thanks for joining us.